On this day, January 7th, 1979, Phnom Penh falls to Vietnamese troops. This followed a short war between the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea and Vietnam. This would mark the end of the Khmer Rouge in power, and it would also end the genocide that had been going on in Cambodia for the past number of years. The history between Vietnam and Cambodia is complex. Most of what is now South Vietnam was at one point a part of the Khmer Empire, the Khmers being a word for Cambodian. Over time, the Vietnamese had become influential, especially along the coast. Vietnamese had started to settle, and in the early 19th century, influence on Cambodia increased. There were also Vietnamese attempts to annex Cambodia, which were successful after French rule started in that area. The Saigon region was Vietnamese-ized during French rule and was added then to the French Cochin China, which was southern Vietnam. Later on, people like Pol Pot would use this to justify his attack, or attacks on southern Vietnam, seeing it as stolen territory and believing that it should become Cambodian once more. After independence, Cambodia had been ruled by its king Sihanouk. However, the Vietnam War next door had destabilized both Cambodia and Laos, neither of which were going to be very prosperous for the next few decades. Eventually, in 1970, Lon Nol took over in Cambodia. He was officially an anti-communist, but he wasn't very fond of Vietnamese. In one massacre under his rule, thousands of Vietnamese were killed, and over 300,000 fled into South Vietnam. That was before the communists took over in either country. After the fall of Saigon, the Khmer Rouge invaded the Vietnamese island of Phu Quoc off the southern coast, barely 24 hours after the fall of Saigon. Phnom Penh had only fallen a few days before Saigon. Throughout that year, various islands had been seized by the Khmer Rouge, and some border skirmishes had already begun between the Khmer Rouge and the invading North Vietnamese army. In 1976, Vietnam was hopeful that relations between Cambodia and Vietnam could become friendly. They had heard, although it was wrong, that Pol Pot and various other top leaders of the Khmer Rouge had resigned. This wasn't the case, but Vietnam was hopeful that they could start influencing Cambodia in the way that they were influencing Laos. Laos was pretty much at this point a Vietnamese protectorate, and they were hoping that Cambodia would follow. However, Cambodia had different plans. They were being very friendly with Mao Zedong, and they looked to China as an example, not to Russia. whereas Vietnam was looking towards Russia instead of China. So throughout the time from 1975, when the Khmer Rouge came to power, and in 1977 there were a number of incidents at the border. This culminated in 1977 with Kampuchean troops invading Vietnam. They took border areas, they massacred people in various villages. The Vietnamese counterattacked and went as far as 24 miles away from Phnom Penh. The Vietnamese decided to pull back, which probably might have been a mistake. If they had done that then, could have ended them 2 years earlier than they did. Pol Pot was, I suppose, the exemplar of a madman. He had plunged his own country into a murderous regime. He had depopulated the main cities and had been starving and killing his own people for the past 5 years now. He thought that he could beat Vietnam. He saw the Vietnamese withdrawal in 1977 as a great victory for his forces. And in 1979, the Vietnamese had approached the commander of Eastern forces in the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, trying to get him on board for an invasion of Vietnamese troops in to Cambodia to remove the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot got wind of this and decided to bring in forces from the west of the country to put down these traitorous rats, as he called them. The leader, the commander of the Eastern forces, committed suicide. Another one defected to Vietnam. At this point, Vietnam had had enough of the Khmer Rouge. They were constantly attacking into Vietnam. They were constantly killing Vietnamese people. And there was no way that this was going to change. The Vietnamese had over 600,000 troops in their army. The Cambodians had less than 80,000. The Vietnamese had hundreds of battle tanks. The Cambodians had half a dozen. The Vietnamese had an air force. Cambodians, not so much. And the Vietnamese weren't starving to death. They weren't in the killing fields. They weren't all working in the fields starving to death, being beaten and humiliated and tortured to death, whereas in Cambodia, they were. So, in 1979, the Vietnamese invade Kampuchea. And on the 7th, they reach Phnom Penh. They take the city and destroy the Khmer Rouge within Phnom Penh. So very quickly, the Khmer Rouge collapsed. Its regime was a paper tiger. The remnants of the Khmer Rouge fled into the jungle near the border with Thailand. It was only the support of China and the United States that kept the Khmer Rouge going. The United States because they hated Vietnam, they hated the embarrassment that had happened in 1975. The Chinese because they just hated Vietnam. They didn't want anyone to push back on them, and they believed that Vietnam was rightly their fief, as it had been for many centuries previously. And so both continued to recognize the Khmer Rouge as the legitimate government of Cambodia, whilst a new government was put in place by Vietnam. Over time, Vietnam realized that they weren't going to be able to stay in Cambodia forever, and so they decided that they would allow democratic elections and a new government to form in Cambodia. Now, throughout the 80s, people became very aware of what had happened in the killing fields and what had happened in the torture chambers in Phnom Penh. But still, the Americans continued to recognize the Khmer Rouge because of their animus towards the Vietnamese. And it was only in the 90s that the Americans finally started to recognize the alternative government in Phnom Penh over the Khmer Rouge. So, that's the story. January 7th, 1979, Phnom Penh falls to the Vietnamese troops, and it marks the end of the reign of terror of the Khmer Rouge. Come back tomorrow for more. Like, subscribe, and comment.